As we all know and understand, cholesterol has been demonized to be the primary cause of heart disease. And this is a big talking point with the medical complex in the United States. The sale and prescription use of statin drugs is the highest categoric class of selling drugs in the world. So this has been a very profitable market for them. But is cholesterol the demon that it's been made out to be? Well, according to Dr. Kumaro, low density lipoprotein, LDL, is not the problem. Cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease except if it is oxidized. The oxidation of LDL particles comes from vegetable oils that are subjected to very high heat or frying. But even without frying, these polyunsaturated oils simply oxidize easily to become oxidized LDL. Looking deeper into understanding this, LDL is a protein that carries cholesterol in the bloodstream. LDL is not cholesterol, it is a carrier. But if LDL becomes oxidized, you begin to build up plaque inside your artery walls. Seed oils increase the susceptibility of this oxidization. The human brain is about 80% fat, and it is largely composed of omega-3s and omega-6s. Further research in 2018, it was later discovered the oxidized LDL caused direct toxic effects to the cell, recruitment and entry of mitocytes into the subendothelial liner, and increased the foam cell formation, leading to increased atherosclerosis and inflammation. Furthermore, native unoxidized LDL does not cause foam cell formation. In other words, LDL had to become oxidized first in order for atherosclerosis to develop. The monocytes pick up the inflammatory oxidized omega-6s in the blood and take them into the endothelial liner. Macrophages in the vascular wall are designed to capture this oxidized LDL and remove it from the bloodstream, which becomes the foam cells. Foam cell deposits in vascular endothelial cells become the arterial plaque. And you can see the macrophages engorged on lipids, that is the composite within these foam cells. As further clarification, they stated the oxidized low-density lipoprotein of coronary heart disease does not get to the root cause. That is, what causes LDL to become oxidized in the first place? It was later discovered that the oxidization of LDL was initiated by the oxidization or breakdown of linoleic acid, the omega-6 contained within the LDL particles. And your omega-6 linoleic acid is the most common oxidized fatty acid in LDL. The researchers further explained that cholesterol bound to saturated fat does not readily oxidize, but that is not the case with linoleic acid or omega-6. Cholesterol was protected from oxidization if bound to saturated fats, but it was susceptible to oxidization when bound to linoleic acid. Heart disease is the number one cause of death for populations of the United States. 18.2 million Americans suffer from heart disease. Heart disease is kind of a catch-all for multiple symptoms, but coronary artery disease deals with the larger coronary arteries on the surface of the heart. Then you have the coronary microvascular disease, which affects the tiny arteries within the heart muscle. The coronary artery disease is focused primarily upon the foam cell formations and the plaque that builds up, reducing the oxygen-rich blood from getting to the heart. The coronary microvascular disease is with those tiny arteries within the heart muscle. Their damage does not occur from plaque buildup, but from damage that causes a disruption in the vasodilation properties, which is dilation and constriction, so that it maintains the blood pressure. And so you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, diabetes. You have hardening of the arteries and scarring from chronic inflammation. And this really becomes the result of metabolic syndrome or metabolic dysfunction. So let's look at our essential dietary fats, omega-6s and omega-3s, what types they are and what they do. Again, these must be obtained from our food because our bodies do not make them. These essential fatty acids are biological, structural, and play functional roles within every cell. They are signaling molecules and they are constituents of our cellular membranes. They allow for permeability and transport through the membranes. And again, they must come from our diet. The problem occurs is that both omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids use the same pathway and the same delta desaturate enzymes to get processed into the body. When you have a balanced or equal intake of omega-3 to omega-6, the distribution is equal. However, when you have a highly elevated omega-6 intake in relation to omega-3 fatty acids, the distribution is equally disproportionate. That means that the body doesn't sort out the excess omega-6s, it simply puts them into the tissue as per the ratio within the diet. So when you have parallel pathways with the same enzymes processing both 3s and 6s, the key is to balance the diet ratio of 3s and 6s. Cattle in our feedlots are fed primarily corn. And remember, these grains are very, very high in omega-6, anywhere from 25 to 35 omega-6 to 1 omega-3 or even higher. And these omega-6 linoleic acids from these grains begin this catastrophic lipid peroxidation cascade also in our animals. Just like us, those animals that are fed these diets start with these degenerative diseases just as we do. The process of digesting food and the oxidation of these excessive omega-6s are the same in them as they are in us. And so you go through this catastrophic lipid peroxidation process, and again, you're going to create mitochondrial dysfunction, which is going to create all of these degenerative disorders. But in addition to that, it starts the cycle of producing a group of these cellular toxins in the tissue of the meat that we are going to later consume. So within the meat that we buy, we have components of hydroxynonenal, malondialdehyde, the oxidized linoleic acid metabolites, acrolein, and carboxyethylpyrrole. Okay? These are poisons that accumulate in the meat, and when we eat that, we are taking in these cellular poisons into our body. And the result, again, is all of this toxicity that affects different functions within our bodies. So whether it's chicken, it's pork, it's lamb, it's beef, it's bison, if it has these high omega-6 inputs, the breakdown and peroxidation of these oils are going to create these metabolic poisons that we consume. And so not only do the high omega-6s begin this cascade of oxidation and toxin production in us, but we also eat that when we consume the byproducts of these meat industries. And so what we're getting is both the cause and the effect from the protein sources that we buy that come from these industrial operations.
In a side-by-side comparison, let's review the choices. Grass-fed is going to have a healthy omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, typically less than 2.5 to 1. And these are basically forage-fed animals. The problem in the industry is what constitutes grass-fed. And that can be anywhere from some grass-fed to predominantly grass-fed to all grass-fed. But when you look at organic grass-fed, there should be very few toxins. Grass-fed should not have vaccinations or antibiotics, but there are some exceptions and some uses allowed, which then kicks you into a different category. Grass-fed and grained finished is another category that you look at, because what type of grains are they feeding? GMO grains like corn and soy, or are they organic grains? And what is the ratio of high seed oil to low seed oil seeds that are being fed? The complaints that we hear all the time with grass-fed is it's tough and it has less flavor than what they're used to in the grocery store. Now you look at feedlot beef, which is 97% or more of what you're going to encounter in grocery stores. They have improved flavor and improved tenderness because they have a shorter feeding period and they can put on animal fat because of the high contents of seed oil in the grains. However, you have a great deal of toxicity. Almost all, predominantly all of these feedlots employ the use of genetically engineered plants and grains, corn, soy, sugar beet byproducts. Even alfalfa now is almost 30% genetically modified, which means now you're going to have genetically engineered toxins. So you're going to have genetically altered carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. One of the traits in genetically engineered corn is the Bt toxin, which is the Bacillus thuringiensis, which is an insecticide that the corn produces to resist the influence of insecticides in the soil and on its leaves. The problem with this is that the Bt gene flows from the grain into the gut microflora, and then the animal begins to produce the insecticide internally. When we eat Bt sweet corn, the gene from the corn goes into our gut microflora, and then we begin to produce an internal insecticide. There is also the prolific and abundant use of glyphosate in genetically engineered crops. So that is a cellular toxin as well. With glyphosate in the feed, you now have a dramatic shift in the healthy gut microflora of the animal from the Enterococcus faecalis, and faecium into the Clostridium botulinum and the botulinum neurotoxins because of the increase of pathogens. What glyphosate does is it kills the beneficial microbes and it massively stimulates the pathogenic populations. And so what you do is you lose those healthy, digestive, nutrient transforming microbes, and in place you end up with bacterium like Clostridium that destroy the tissue and produce neurotoxins that are then absorbed into the bloodstream. Glyphosate also ties up your trace minerals, which shuts down enzymatic functions in the cells. Glyphosate destroys your immune system as it destroys the beneficial gut microflora, which are the basis of 70 to 80% of your immune system. You lose that health. This is why I'm saying over and over, when you eat feedlot animals, you're eating very unhealthy, nutrient deficient, toxic meat. The animals experience the cell nucleus and mitochondria damage and dysfunction. There's neurological disorders. These also cause in humans depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's disease. And again, if our animals are eating the seed oils that contain glyphosate and other agricultural toxins, we get that. And that then causes cellular and mitochondria damage in our systems. In feedlots, there's a lot of drug usage. Antibiotics are a norm. They have to have them because of the high populations. And so animal consumption of antibiotics are 7 times that of the human population. Implants and hormones and injections are all common. There's routine vaccinations. And now the problem is we're learning that these animals are now being injected with the new mRNA gene therapy type vaccines. And much of the intent of vaccinating animals with mRNA type vaccines is that will in turn vaccinate us with the same technology. My personal opinion is that is something that should be avoided at any cost. As you know, the chemical toxicity, the herbicides, the glyphosate, Roundup, glufosinate, 2,4-D, the dicambas, the paraquats, fungicides, insecticides, pesticides, all of that end up in the food chain. And it ends up in our livestock and it ends up in our diet. This is one of the reasons that people advocate eating organically, is to try to avoid this genetic engineering toxicity, the drug toxicity, and the chemical toxicity. However, last but not least is the metabolic toxicity, this oxidation of omega-6s. And even the organic people are getting caught here. So when we look at these predominant oxidizing poisons that come from the breakdown of linoleic acid, you have this lipid hydroperoxidase process that creates such toxic compounds as 4-hydroxynonenal, malondialdehyde, your oxidized linoleic acid metabolites, your acrolein and your carboxyethylpyrrole. Okay, these again are cytotoxic, which means they are toxic to your cells. They're genotoxic, which they damage genetic information within your cells. They're mutagenic. These cause and induce mutations. Carcinogenic, cancer-forming. Atherogenic, these are the fatty plaques inside our arteries causing cardiovascular disease. Thrombogenic, these are causing blood clotting. Obesogenic, this is causing the obesity crisis in the American population because of our diet. Teratogenic, causing the defects in the developing fetus. So feedlot grains of all kind, not just beef, but pork and chicken all come with a massive load of toxicity. Omega balanced natural beef. We have the healthiest essential fatty acid ratios of typically that 1-to-1 ratio or even less. We have tremendous flavor because we have enough energy to produce fat in the short growing time that we have for our animals, which makes them very tender. Most of our meat grades prime or choice. We have very high feed efficiencies due to our fermentation program. We have higher nutrient contents. We have higher energy. Our animals are produced in 15 months or less. Our forages and all of the products we use in our fermentation processes can all qualify as organic. This is a small representation of the extensive testing that we have been conducting over years in accumulating data on the omega-6 to the omega-3 ratios in various protein sources such as pork, beef, lamb, chicken, eggs, bison, etc., and in the various categories of grain-fed, seed oil-based, grass-fed, and our fermented forage omega balance natural beef, bison, and lamb. In looking at the grain-based or high seed oil type diets, we find omega-6 to omega-3 balances from 7 to 8 to 1 up to as high as almost 30 to 1. And this depends on the ratio of corn, the ratio of soy, the ratio of wheat and barley that are in the feed blends. More corn is going to give a higher omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Less corn and more grain and barley, wheat and barley, will give a little bit lower omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. But again, focusing on the level of 2.5 to 1 that we do not want to go above, we see that anything grain, seed oil based fed is going to be way in excess of those numbers. Now, we've taken grass-fed and grass-finished meat and we've tested it. Our grass-fed beef came in at 1.4 to 1, which is a good, healthy ratio. That's very good. Our grass-fed bison from another farm came in at 2.2 to 1. Again, a very good, safe ratio. It's not going to cause high oxidation and inflammation. But this is typically where you see grass-fed animals in that 1 to 1 and 2 to 1 range. They're going to have less flavor because there's less fat, and they're going to be a little tougher because they're older. This brings us to the lowest of the oxidation and inflammatory properties with the highest quality, with excellent flavor, and being very tender. And these are the fermented forage beef that are raised by Biominerals Technologies, which we call Omega Balanced Natural Meats. Now, we've done this with beef, we've done it with bison, we've done it with lambs. And here are our results. Omega Balanced Natural Beef, 0.8 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. So we have lower 6s than we actually have of 3s. Our bison, 0.9 omega-6s to 1 omega-3s. Again, lower 6s than 3s. Our omega balanced natural meat with lambs, 1.1 to 1. Our fermented forage diets consist of grasses, cereals, and legumes. And this gives us several very distinct advantages. By fermenting the forages, we have a very improved feed conversion ratio, which means we can feed much less forage per pound of gain. It means our animals gain weight quicker, they have the excess energy to produce fat, And because of the quicker growth and finishing time, they're very, very tender. And we have the healthiest omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratios of anybody I'm aware of. Our animals are never fed grain of any kind. They never receive vaccines, they never receive antibiotics, and they never have an implant. There are no chemical or drug uses within any of our feeding programs on any of our livestock.